Gamers are used to having ultimate control. By this, I mean that when the player can control, they're the only thing halting or causing progression. Certain games might be challenging or puzzling, but it is understood that if one is skilled enough for the former or finds the solution for the latter, they can progress. Games tend to embrace this sort of player control because it is something only games can offer. You can't go to a movie and be the only means by which the movie plays. Now, let's take a look at a crucial moment in The Last Guardian. In this section, you've been separated from Trico. Ultimately, you get trapped in a cage. The game allows the player to roll around for quite some time, emphasized by a fade to black time skip in between. Now, this is crucial. The player cannot actually do anything here. No matter how much you roll, you're stuck. The only way to progress is by realizing this and calling out for Trico, who then breaks into the room and saves you. On a basic level, this is a scripted sequence like any other. However, in this case, you can roll around forever and it only continues once you give up. The game forces the player to realize their powerlessness and admit they need help. I've never seen a game do this before. And this isn't specific to just this one portion either. Like the title of this video implies, I'd argue the entire game is a practice in taking power away from the player. The core mechanic of the game has the boy navigating a world far larger than himself with the help of a 30-foot creature. There are a few sections in the game where the boy progresses on his own, and in these sections, like the cage scene, the purpose is always to reunite with Trico to properly progress. Giving Trico commands differentiates itself from a typical game mechanic by processing it through the middleman of Trico's AI. Sure, the player can see where they must go and give the command, but Trico operates like a real animal, meaning easily distractible, frustrating, and sometimes flat out stupid. Many list this as one of the game's biggest flaws, but I believe it to be its smartest design. To understand why, let's take a look at a few recent examples of game companions. The Last of Us and Bioshock Infinite are two of my favorite games, but one of their biggest failures is their handling of Ellie and Elizabeth respectively. They are infallible. Ellie cannot get spotted by enemies no matter how much she rubs up against them, and Elizabeth finds useful items for you from seemingly nowhere. If the characters weren't so well written and performed, they would be impossible to grow an attachment to. The designers forgot that real-life attachments are not formed because of how perfect someone is, but because of how much you need them despite their imperfections. The Last of Us and Bioshock Infinite have moments where they make their companions superficially needed, like when Ellie must be boosted over a wall or when Elizabeth opens a tear, but don't give the player that much needed frustration. It's in the frustration where The Last Guardian succeeds. When Trico would complete 6 jumps only to turn around and jump back down all 6 times, I got pissed. What a dumbass. But by allowing me to think what a dumbass, the game empowers the moments when Trico isn't a dumbass. And by making progression hinged on AI that can be a dumbass, the player can only rejoice when it cooperates and does something intelligently. If Trico were on a preset path and always cooperated, he'd be little more than just something to climb on. The game is wonderfully aware of how player control can be used to strengthen the delivery of its narrative and characters. It's small, but I really appreciated how instead of just hitting a button to pull a lever, the game makes the player grab the lever with one button and physically pull it down with the control stick. It seems every aspect of the game was designed with the understanding that this small boy couldn't do jack shit on his own. The boy is awkward to control, he stumbles, he flails, and if he falls from a height, he limps. The game embraces powerlessness because its protagonist is weak. By putting focus on awkward player control and lack of ultimate control, the game puts the player in the boy's position. These are the ways games can immerse us that no other medium can. Perhaps in the game's cruelest sequence, Trico attempts to follow the boy through a narrow tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, the player pulls back a chain to lift a gate so Trico can squeeze through, but Trico winds up getting stuck with its neck in line with the gate. The player holds onto the chain, fearing what may happen if the gate comes down on Trico's neck, but the player must let go, knowing full well they could decapitate their faithful companion. Trico gets crushed and there's 2 ways to go: progress along the tunnel without Trico only to realize that there's nowhere the boy can make it on his own, or walk over to Trico and have the tunnel collapse on both of you. There's many more sequences like this, where the game takes away player control to highlight the boy's reliance on Trico. I've seen too many people dismissing The Last Guardian altogether because of Trico's finickiness and the clumsy boy controls. Gamers are too used to having ultimate control. When the game throws a dumbass dog between the gamer and progression, the designers didn't mess up, they're making an argument for what games can be. The Last Guardian may be the only game in history that isn't some kind of power fantasy, but rather a powerless fantasy.